Thank you. Good morning. So I'd like to start off by just sort of, I've been eavesdropping, so I know you teach chemistry. But I'd like to just sort of, ask you guys to say who you are and what you teach and grade level and stuff like that. So if you'd start, and your name's Shannon, right?
Yes.
I was peeking.
I'm Shannon Sosa. I teach chemistry at Edison High School.
And
My name is Maria Castillo. I'm still not teaching yet. I'm in my second semester of the graduate program at Edison. I have a degree in biochemistry, so I can do biology.
nice.
I'm Allison Shirawi. I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science at Alternative Middle School in Northeast.
My name is Catherine Zinn. I'm an elementary science specialist with Jetson ISD, so I don't actually teach in a classroom. I teach teachers.
Great.
I'm Andrea Stott. I'm an education specialist with OSTEC. And I'm Rosemary Castro, education specialist in science.
Royna Weiss, science specialist.
I'm Maria Elena Rodriguez, and I'm an educational specialist, and my specialty is bilingual ed and ESL. And I'm Effie Monta, I'm the assistant director for OPIC, and my specialty area is mathematics.
I'm Alyssa Escobar. I'm a pre-service teacher, and I'm getting my certification in high school science.
I'm Jackie Nielsen, and I'm a third, fourth, and fifth grade science teacher at Gator
Oh, this is great because we really cover the span. Third grade, all this is wonderful. Okay, great. Thank you for coming. So we're going to get started, and here's the plan. The plan is that I'm going to talk at you, unfortunately, for about 35, 40 minutes. And the goal is to kind of talk to you about the work and to talk the work that I've done with teachers over a bunch of years to try to make science, in this case, much more accessible to students. Then we're going to stop there, and I'm going to ask you to write very briefly about what literacy is in your discipline. What does it look like? And then we'll take a break, and we'll share, and then for the rest of the day, we're going to be working with the actual tools the three tools that we use in our work to support kids' access to science, and their annotation, double entry journaling, and summary, and you'll hear about those. And that's the work of the day. We'll take breaks and have time to share in between, but you'll be talking to your table mates as well, and I'll sort of wander around, and the ed specialist here will wander around and support the work. So that's the plan for today, and it should be fun. I hope you have a good time. So let's get started. And so the problem, as you guys know, because you're here, so you know it, is that in middle school and high school, there really is this very large gap between what students can read and what they're expected to read. Oh, sorry, louder, okay. What they can read and what they're expected to read in mathematics, science, social studies, and ELA. And my focus primarily is always in math and science. I am in the STEM disciplines in terms of my relationship to literacy. And so I'm always focused on those two, but it is the case that even in social studies and as well as in ELA, there's a really big gap between what students are supposed to be reading and what they can read. And this is most evident in school communities that have very large non-English background, numbers of large English background speakers, kids with low reading scores, and low-income students. And I spent about 19 years in Chicago, both in my doctoral program and then a postdoc, and then as an assistant professor. And what Chicago has a lot of is that combination. There are large numbers of Black and Latino students. There are large numbers of schools that have the predominant number of students are reading below grade level. We have some schools that are just being closed in Chicago now that for years only had maybe 15 to 20% of the kids in the entire school who read at or above grade level. That's just problematic. It's very sad. And then when you combine that with the fact that the National Science Foundation, over the period from about 1994 until roughly 2005, were pouring a lot of money into urban science education. And so people were designing new curricula at various colleges and universities. And the curricular materials, which is what got me started on this path, the curricular materials were very nice. They were technology infused and inquiry oriented, but they were not thinking about the fact that they were going to be teaching these materials were going to be taught in schools where kids had low literacy skills and they were non-English background learners. So that's a problem, right? Because if you have amazing science materials, but the students can't take advantage of them and the teachers aren't necessarily trained to work with those with those populations in science in ways that aren't kind of stand and lecture, stand and deliver, then the students really don't get the kind of access to science that they need to. And this is just an illustration. I showed this to the ed specialist yesterday. It's an illustration of the differences between what kids are supposed to read, be able to read, and what they can. So in a school that we were in Chicago, the average reading score was 39 on the degrees of reading power, which is a reading comprehension test that tests across the disciplines. That is the materials, the reading materials could be in English, math, science, social studies. So this is what they can read, and this is what nationally ninth graders are supposed to be able to read. And so if you look at this, you know, you've got very, very short sentences. A bird's wings are well shaped for flight. The wing is curved. It cuts the air. This helps lift the bird. Now, in point of fact, the 39 is about a third or fourth grade reading level. And this is what our students were reading. But here, beginning about 75 years ago, hundreds of small dams began to be decommissioned. You notice the words decommissioned, conservation, dilapidated, maintenance, downstream. What they're able to read, and this is what they were supposed to be able to read nationally, there's a big difference between the two. So then what are some of the typical curricular and instructional implications? Well, schools and teachers try to adopt or design very complex curricular materials. They try to deal with this, that minimally complex. They try to get fewer science readings so the teacher just works around the science text because it's just too painful. Sometimes people rewrite the text to try to decrease complexity. They'll eliminate vocabulary items and reduce transition words like in spite of and by contrast to and so forth that signal a shift in the argument. And they'll try to figure out ways to make the text more manageable. And this is the kind of thing that we've been doing, is trying to figure out how to make them more manageable and accessible so that texts are not marginalized, so that you're not working around the text. The texts are an integral part of the learning, and that kids learn to read and write and discuss within the language of the discipline, the language of science. So why isn't this happening more often? Well, as you know, too few pre-service programs are analyzing, having teachers analyze, pre-service teachers analyze curricular materials, the reading charts, graphs, tables, formative and summative assessments with content area literacy in mind. There's a lot that needs to be done. Pre-service programs are only so long, and it has not been something that's been deeply and sustained in any way a part of hardly any pre-service program I've seen. It's just not something we do because we're so busy trying to teach the content. There's little time to plan to change for teachers. That, you know, when you're trying to keep up with the pacing, when you have planning to do in the summer, it's not enough time to plan necessarily to change, and it's hard to do by yourself. So there's also not enough professional development in this area. So I don't know how many of you have ever been to a professional development course that's supposed to teach you about literacy, and maybe it's a 1-day or 2-day thing, and what you get is like a bunch of strategies. You learn about KWLs and QAR and all this stuff, and you get a bunch of strategies, and it's very disconnected from your materials, and you may or may not get a chance to practice them. You mostly get to hear them. And so what ends up happening is you take it, you try it out, but without any kind of sustained relationship to the strategies and to the underlying thinking about the strategies, it's hard. It's really hard to do 40 or 50 different strategies well. And so our solution to this, which I'll talk to you about, is to just focus on just three. And we do them ad nauseum with our teachers because we believe that smaller is better. You also need to have an understanding of why you would use a particular strategy when. And that's really important because a strategy that's appropriate for a particular kind of science reading that's focused on teaching processes or analyzing a formula is a different kind of strategy than you'd need necessarily to learn the vocabulary, the science, the language of the discipline. So that's the kind of thing that we think is important. And then you got to think about which students are they most effective with and how do they get seamlessly integrated. So this is the work that we do. Our group is called the Improvement by Design Project. And we do try to increase subject area achievement by increasing reading comprehension. Put simply, we try to increase science achievement by improving students' reading. We try to make text more prominent, both in teaching and in assessment. And we try to provide routines and opportunities for students to practice and apply these tools. And so in our Improvement by Design group, we talk about problems of practice. And one problem of practice is just using text in science learning. And so, again, as I've said earlier, teachers have a limited or uneven understanding about the role of text as a vehicle in content area learning and as a resource, how you would use it, why you would use it, when you would use it. And we're going to have an activity after this talk where we'll explore that a little bit. And then there are little opportunities to reflect about how text has supported your own disciplinary learning, how you learn science. And then you need tools and routines to couple these ways of teaching science with the sort of activities of science and putting those together with literacy texts. There's another problem of practice, and that's the routines themselves. You need capacity to know when you should present a text in class, how you should present it. You can just follow exactly what the textbook says, but the textbook isn't always right. The textbook may be organized in such a way, let's say on a chapter, and the chapter may have a text that's introducing a concept that may be 3 or 4 pages into the text or 4 or 5 pages into the chapter, and it may be something that actually needed to be taught at the beginning of the chapter instead. It's not necessarily the case that the way that the chapter is organized fits your goals for teaching the lesson. So, for example, if a text introduces a concept, maybe the text should be first, even if the publisher has it coming later. If it reinforces or summarizes, maybe it should come later. If it has procedures for inquiry and investigation, you have to think about where should it come in the text, because you're thinking about your goals. What are your goals for this chapter? What are your goals for introducing this concept? Learning, teaching the students this set of procedures. How do the way these readings are organized fit with your goals? So how do you perhaps need to move things around a bit in terms of how you teach it? If there are disciplinary words, if there's science words or phrases, how should they be taught? And then there's always the case of just how much should be read. Not everything, bless you, not everything in the chapter necessarily needs to be read. It could be the case that you just need to chunk bits and pieces that are fundamental, that if the students don't get that information, they're going to be hosed because they're really not going to understand what the chapter is about. And so doing the thinking of saying, what's the information that they must read, that they must learn? And so that's the kind of thing that is a problem of practice. From an analytic standpoint, what we do, I was saying to Maria Elena a minute ago, what we do is we do what we call work circles. And a work circle is a a group of people who ultimately become sort of friends. We play in the sandbox together, and we work together on a regular basis, university people, coaches or specialists, and teachers all working together to analyze the science materials. So if you have a textbook and any other materials that you tend to use to teach science, everyone just brings their stuff and sort of puts it on the table over a period of time. And we analyze those materials and we say, where are the fundamentally important things that students really need to know? How are they showing up in the readings? How are they showing up in these materials? And then making some decisions about, given these important things, what's the role of those things? And I'll talk about that. But that's an analytic approach to your materials. And it's true that the state and the district have already come up with standards and so forth, but I'm really not talking about just the standards. I'm really talking about what the purpose of that particular set of readings are, thinking about the purpose of them. And so one of the kinds of analyses we do is just what type of text is it? And I said a little bit a minute ago, but I'm trying to reinforce it here. In any given science textbook or set of materials, if you're using maybe alternative materials from NSF or whatever, in any given science textbook or materials, you're going to have different kinds of texts. So you're going to have text that mostly the role of that particular reading on that particular page is to introduce vocabulary that the students need to have for the rest of the chapter. Or it could be a kind of overview. It could be really, the goal is just an overview, setting the context. It could be text that is delivering specific kinds of facts, trying to show particular patterns. It could be something that's about a procedure or process that students are going to need to know to do the work, do the inquiry. It might have information about formulas or structures and so forth. Every single text in science has a role. It has a purpose. And thinking in terms of your lessons and your goals, understanding the purpose of those materials is critical. So lesson goals. What are your lesson goals? What are your plans? Is your plan for that day to introduce the concept, to give them just some exposure to the vocabulary, to teach them a procedure, to teach them some important event that happened that has to do with science, to make connections to earlier readings? What's the goal? What's the goal? And when you think about what you do so far, that is before today, when you think about what you do so far, how do you deal with the text in your materials? Do you mostly avoid the text? Do you really do major scaffolding of text? Maybe you do the reading, the best reader in the class or readers in the class do the reading. Do you do a lot of hand-holding in terms of PowerPoints or giving them notes that you've already gone through a lot of trouble and given up your TV time to try to type all this stuff out, you know? Or is it, do you use KWLs or some other sort of literacy strategy? Do you have routines because you're trying to know what they know, so you read, you discuss, you give them quizzes or exit slips or other sorts of quick writes, whatever it is to try to know what they know. So thinking about what your goals are for the lesson and how you typically implement that lesson. And then also formative assessment. Formative assessment, I was saying to ed specialists yesterday, I think is an undervalued thing. Formative assessment is wonderful because if you get the information on an ongoing basis, you actually have a pretty good sense of what your students know and don't know. You know what to teach and reteach. It matters. It matters. I love it much more than summative assessment because by the time you get to the end, I mean, it's like, they're gone. You've covered that material or you haven't necessarily had to learn the material and then they're just sort of gone and you've lost your opportunity. With formative assessment, you can keep refining your teaching and refining your information. So one of the things that I think is a sort of gimme in formative assessment is the end of chapter questions. They're there. They're there, just waiting to be used. And mostly what we do is we'll say, for homework, do all of the questions, or do numbers 1, 3, 5, and 7, or something of that sort. Another way to think about it, though, is from an analysis standpoint, given your goals for the lesson, what can those end of chapter questions do for you? So what do you want the students to get from those end of chapter questions? So if you analyze the end of chapter questions, they might be just requests for fact-based information. Students have to just give a fact that they can easily find in the book. Or they might be asking students to analyze information, synthesize it, draw conclusions. They might be asking students to create a chart or graph, plug some information in. What are they being asked to do? They might ask them just to provide a definition. That sometimes happens. They may be describing a process, a procedural thing. Describe the process through which X can be illustrated. Make a prediction. Provide a summary of what you just read, or provide a summary of the phenomena that they learned about in that chapter. It may be asking them to make connections. Actually doing the analysis to go through and say, what is the role of these questions? What do each one of these questions do at the end of the chapter? And which question or questions best connect to my lesson goals? That helps you understand why you would assign certain questions and what you want from them. So I mentioned earlier that we use strategic tools and routines. We use annotation, we use double entry journaling, and we use summary writing. And the routines have to do with what you do to introduce them to begin with, and then what you do as an ongoing basis, because you don't just introduce them once and then the students are supposed to sort of know it after that. The annotation, double entry journaling, and summary are things that we suggest that students use at least once a week so that they can maintain their practice, get better at it, and the better they get at it, the better they're able to represent their knowledge. And so annotation is just a tool, a strategic literacy tool that helps students recognize the structures in text. So as you know, in a textbook, multiple authors wrote this thing, not just one. And the editors of the textbooks, their job is to kind of smooth out the different voices so that it doesn't seem like it's written by multiple voices, but they still have their quirks, because the editors are they're trying to pay attention to some of the structural features, but mostly they're thinking about the content and making sure there aren't inconsistencies and so forth. So what will happen then is that a text may be written by, one person, and that text has a claim and evidence in it, for the claim. But another text only has main ideas, supporting ideas, topic sentences, things like that. And so the goal is to try to get students to pay attention to the information that's in the text, not just the content, but also the structure. Because things like transition words, which are a big thing in science text, can really just throw kids for a loop if they're not paying attention. They don't know some argument just happened. Some shift by contrast to, they have no idea. They have no idea the shift happened. It's also the case that they may be reading something and an important vocabulary word is there in the text, but because it's between commas, that is, the definition is between commas, so things like the decomposition of comma, and there's a definition of what decomposition is, comma, so forth. They don't know that in between those commas is the definition they need. They're looking for the definition and don't know it's there, and therefore, because they don't know it's there, they get the problem wrong. They get the ideas wrong. So they just need to be able to pay attention to these structural features. Double entry journaling is, you guys probably know it as Cornell notes. We only do the journal part of it, that is the T-chart. The summary we do separately, but it's essentially Cornell notes, and we've had people use the Cornell note sheets, and it works fine. But the double entry journal is a tool to help them reflect on what they actually understood from the text. And then summarization helps them analyze what they did, but it really is a better tool for you because it helps you in that short 3 or 4 or 5 sentences, you know what they understood or didn't understand. Can they capture the gist of it? So annotation to introduce it, you would, and we often suggest putting it either on a overhead projector or something like that, the reading that you're going to be doing. And let me just give you, so that's what it looks like. Let's say you have the reading on the overhead projector. And so you would explain annotation, then you would describe the specifics, and I think you have it on your table. You have some examples of doing annotation. And then you would say, and this is a very important part, you would say to the students, you know those chapters, those questions at the end of the chapter, those ones you're going to be having to answer? This annotation is going to help you answer those questions. You're going to be paying attention to the reading much more carefully, and you'll be able to answer the questions at the end of the chapter. What student isn't going to get excited about that, right? Because they want to be able to answer it correctly. Students don't want to get things wrong. It happens. But if they know that there's a purpose for doing this, it helps a lot. Then you guide the students on a 1 paragraph at a time through it, and then review the results as a group and discuss the reading afterwards. One of the things that teachers we've worked with over the years have told us is that their students are so excited because since they had to sit there and annotate, and usually what will happen, this is why it's so critical to choose the readings that are most important, because you can't Xerox everything, right? It's expensive. And so you choose the readings that are absolutely critical for them to read and in order to be able to understand the materials. Those are the things you make a copy of. And the kids can mark on it, they can annotate by marking on the materials. So by virtue of reading through those materials and having to annotate it, they slow down their reading. Those who wouldn't normally read actually read because they've got a mark on the paper for the first time. You know that they read or didn't read because they've got a mark on something. They have the tools. They know that they're supposed to circle and underline and draw triangles and so forth. And lo and behold, they actually have read the materials. By virtue of reading the materials, they can participate in the discussion, and they are thrilled. The ones who don't normally participate are thrilled because they can. They actually learn something from the reading. Why did they learn something from the reading? Because they had to slow down and pay attention to what they were reading. And that matters. Because mostly the ones who don't know how to read well will pretend to look over it, see that it's difficult, sit back and wait for the other kids to explain it or the teacher to explain it. That's what they do. There's some that will try to struggle through, but they'll get discouraged. So slowing them down, giving them something to act on the material, marking up something is an incredibly helpful thing. It gives you agency because you can touch it and you can do something with it. And that helps a lot. I don't think annotation is magic at all, but I do think that what it does is it slows them down, gets them to pay attention, and then they feel better because they've actually read the material. And so again, this is an example. You can see here triangles for the vocabulary words, rectangles for other words that are important, underlining the argument and the evidence, circling the headings, just getting students to pay attention to what they're reading. And especially if this is something that's critical for them to really understand in order to be able to get the rest of the chapter, that's important. So here's an example. We have worked mostly in science from 6th grade through 12th grade. So we've covered everything from the basics of environmental science and earth science all the way through physics. And we found a huge amount of consistency from teachers in terms of the use of these materials and how effective they've been. And you can see we pay attention to things like procedure words. Getting students to actually annotate procedure words. They know that those procedure words are there now. They know what a procedure word is. Having them pay attention to formulas. Just putting a little equal sign by the formulas. Having them triangle and rectangle vocabulary words. All of these things give them power power with the text, which has not always been their friend. It's been their enemy in many cases. They're scared of it. And especially they're scared of it in something like science. It gives them power because they can act on it. So an example of a routine in our teacher notes that we created with the teachers as a part of the materials, it describes what the particular article is about. They're asked to think about themselves, their lifestyles, future choices, the impact of their lives and choices on the sustainability of Earth. And then in bold, particular interest should be placed on vocabulary, words, and definitions for this article. Not for everything in the chapter, but for this article. This article is really about vocabulary, words, and definitions. Guide the class through the location of main and supporting ideas. Be sure to point out the definition of sustainable resource use. A comparison is being drawn. This is important for students to recognize. So those are the kinds of things that in our work circle group we created for the most important things that they read. And this is, this is a couple of teachers working together and saying, we're going to take on this article and we're going to say for this particular article, these are the things that ought to be pointed out. And it's working together, as my mother used to say, many hands make light work, right? So, working together, we were able to do these sorts of things for the most important readings, and it really makes a difference. So double entry journaling, as I said, you guys are probably pretty familiar with this. The double entry journaling is a wonderful tool because there's so many things you can do with it. You've got some information on there, and then you should have some information loaded as well that tells you all the different kinds of ways you can use double entry journaling. They're just multiple. You can do a vocabulary word and what I think it means, main ideas, supporting ideas, claims and evidence, a formula, and how I worked out the problem. Any number of things like that can be on a double entry journal. They're just great tools. And then there's summary writing. And in our case, we used a tool. It's an online tool that doesn't cost very much money to the school or school district because Pearson just wants to have it used. But it's called Summary Street. And students write a summary. And the way that Summary Street works is there's an algorithm that there are like thousands and thousands of readings about science in the software. And when a student writes a summary about something that's in your textbook, about maggots, for example, Summary Street then analyzes, just like that, the words that are in that student's summary and compares them to that thousands and thousands of corpus of summaries that are about maggots. It's amazing. And the students love it because they can get feedback right away, whether they've done a good job on writing the summary. It also looks for redundancy. It looks for plagiarism. It looks for irrelevant sentences. It tells them if it's too long or too short, and you as a teacher can decide how long you want it to be. It's a very cool tool. Pearson. It's bless you. Pearson Knowledge Analysis Technologies. It's a tool. It's called Summary Street, and it's by Pearson, and you can just find it online, and you can actually try it out online. And so one of the things that we also did in our work circle groups was create notes for how to introduce summary writing. Because, it's sort of, you could say, okay, kids, in your own words, write what you just learned about. It doesn't work so well. What you get is a sentence maybe or two, or the younger ones, 6th and 7th graders, will what they'll do is they'll go to the reading and they'll write the first sentence from the reading and the last sentence from the reading, and then in between they'll try to say some words that say what they know. It's a very ineffective tool, and so an ineffective way of doing it. And so we sort of say, have the students, that annotation they did? Have the students read the titles and subtitles, make predictions what the article is going to be about, read the first paragraph together, identify the main idea, because remember they annotated, so now they have the main idea already picked out. And I should mention that in annotation, they don't have to do all those steps. Again, it's about your lesson goals. You may only want them to annotate the vocabulary. You may only want them to annotate the main idea and supporting idea. But whatever it is you want them to do should be connected then to what you want them to do for your summary. And so these are the kinds of simple guides that are attached to these materials, just sort of slotted in the materials to say, here's a routine for teaching students to write a summary. And we always, whenever there's time, particularly for the younger grades, ask them to peer edit each other's drafts because it gives them a sense of, again, power. Because you can argue that if a student can edit someone else's paper, they can read it and say, okay, well, I think you left out this important idea or that important idea. That student has to know something about the content in order to be able to edit someone else's paper. So using the tools, we have found that teachers do amazing things with these tools. So using a DEJ, this was in a chemistry class at a school in Chicago, high school in Chicago. It was about the nature of liquids. So the teacher and the science/literacy coach, because it's a science, the coach who works with us is a former science teacher, high school, who got really interested in the literacy and working with us and then ultimately became the coach. So she knows science and she knows literacy. So they created a DEJ that was very tightly coupled to the text. And so the DEJ, imagine the T-chart, the DEJ used information in the text to fill in the scenarios in the science. And then the teacher used the DEJ as a formative assessment. He looked over their work before he then led the class discussion the next day about the nature of liquids. And he looked over the scenarios that the students wrote, that they created, that were their own scenarios about the nature of liquids. And that helped inform his instructional moves in class. So he used it as a formative assessment. We've found that these tools can be used in combination or by themselves, so you could have students annotate a text and then later they might do a vocabulary double entry log just about the vocabulary because they've already annotated so they know where the vocabulary is. You might have the students do an argument and evidence double entry log, and then for homework they would do a summary. Well, it's pretty easy to do a summary if you've already got a DEJ that's created that tells you what the argument is and the evidence. So using them in combination can be very helpful. So putting it all together. I've told you guys a lot of stuff, and I've talked to you about the work circles and our grouping and our planning and stuff. This is what it sort of looks like. We get together, we analyze curricular materials, we identify the key lessons, we think about the role of the lesson and what your goals are. We look at what the students must read and do, think about your goals, and then we look at the end of chapter questions, think about the role of those questions, think about your instructional goals, and then we identify the strategic literacy tool that best supports the role of the lessons, your instructional goals, and your formative assessment goals. And we do a lot of professional development sessions with our teachers, but it's in large part, the work circle work is its own professional development. Because you're not just sort of sitting back and just listening. You're actually hands-on working with your materials. It's a very powerful form of professional development. And we've made this argument to principals and to curriculum district leaders, and mostly they get it. Because we say, some of that professional development that you have your teachers doing, where they just go in and then they never do anything with it. This is so much more effective. They're actually going to be doing something with the materials that they have to teach anyway. And they're analyzing their materials and making those materials tailored to their needs and their understanding of the students. And mostly, we've been pretty successful in getting principals and curriculum people to understand that for the teachers who want to do this work, this is good professional development. So the professional development, we monitor the pacing guide because we know that teachers are constantly being checked to see if they are on pace. And the fact of the matter is that when they're first starting to do annotations and double entry journals and summaries, it slows kids down. And it gets a little crazy because you worry, I'm way off pace. But what happens is, over the course of time, the kids catch up and they are either at pace with their peers, and in most cases they are ahead of pace by the end of the year. And the reason is because they don't have to have so much reteaching. So once they get going and learn how to do the annotations and double entry journaling and so forth, once they get going and really understand how to use that information to participate in good class discussions, teacher doesn't have to do a lot of reteaching. There's a lot less that has to be done because the kids are reading. They're reading the material. They get the material. We do a lot of public sharing of student work and analyzing it. We do a lot of co-creating of peer review assessments, and teachers create their own formative assessments from the questions at the end of the chapter. And we just keep refining the work. And it becomes, as I said, a kind of play group of people interested in trying to connect their goals for teaching and their understanding of the kids and their materials in a much different way. So here's another example of trying to connect the conceptual knowledge to the text. So here, this particular unit is called Investigations in Environmental Science. And the opening question for the very first chapter, what is environmental science? So using that question to conversation to fill in the right side of the DEJ. So on the left side would be what is environmental science, and on the right side is here are some things that students believe are environmental science. And so thinking about what misconceptions the students might have, figuring out what the problem is, and learning how to use the DEJ, these are the goals. Discussing why annotation is going to be useful for them. And this is the sort of thing we'll do. We'll say, ask students to locate the heading. We'll guide students through placing a box around the vocabulary words and triangle around other difficult words. Other difficult words are words that students are unfamiliar with, that are used in ways that are different than their everyday usages. So, and we've encountered some really interesting things, like in a particular lesson, it might say, the scale of the problem is significant. And on the very next paragraph, it'll say, the gopher tortoise's scales are rough. Now, you've got scale and scales. We, because we're all well educated, we get it. Students, not so much. For them, those words are the same, and they're confused. We've had students who see the word burrow, B-U-R-R-O-W, and they're talking about maybe the gopher tortoise burrowing into the sand, and they're sitting there confused, don't know what to say, and then finally one of them says, why would a burrow go into the sand? That word looks like a word they know, and they don't understand that it's spelled differently, it's a different word, and it means something different in science. And there are just hundreds of words like this. And so understanding, looking over the materials ahead of time and saying, what are probably the things that students are going to get confused about? And also having them identify the words that they are unfamiliar with is really helpful, because you don't waste a lot of time in a bunch of reteaching. You know ahead of time what they don't know and don't understand. This is something else that we do in the work circles. So we'll say Chapter 1, Lesson 1A, called Overcrowded. That's the lesson. We'll make recommendations. Well, you probably ought to annotate, maybe the headings and vocabulary, main ideas and supporting ideas. The teaching strategy might be to introduce annotations in double entry journals. But then you get down here and Chapter 2, Lesson 3E. And remember, these are the only lessons that are critical, the only readings that are critical to the chapter. If they don't get these readings, they're not going to understand the chapter. Okay? And so that's one of those for Chapter 1, two of those for Chapter 2. And making some decisions about what you're actually going to use in terms of the tools. Maybe there'll be a writing prompt and some notes for the teachers, asking students to annotate on their own or do in groups. And again, it's many hands make light work. If you're all working together, if you've got somebody else to work with to do this sort of planning, it matters. These are some examples of peer assessments that teachers came up with. So what they did, which was really cool, they got students' answers to a question from another teacher who had taught this lesson before, and they said, here's a sample answer, here's a sample answer, here's a sample answer, and the student's job was to decide what was the best answer. So remember to consider the pros and cons as well, and then grade it for 1 point for attempting to answer the question, 1 point for writing in a complete sentence, for mentioning specific pros, specific cons. So this is high school, but again, this is high school in a very challenged school in a very challenged class. But the students felt very powerful in being able to actually look at someone else's answers and decide what was a good answer and what wasn't a good answer. And the last thing that we did in the work circle, the last thing I'm going to talk about today is that we would ask ourselves for a lesson. We had this kind of rubric that we always went by. So we'd say for a lesson, let's say if it's lesson 3E, where's the content? Is the content giving a definition? Is the reading that the kids have to do broken into sections clearly? Maybe there are some inferences there, so maybe the students need to annotate them. If yes, then is it enough for students to pick out the main ideas? Up here, if no, will students have any prior knowledge or be able to associate with vocabulary words? So it's following the trail of decisions that have an influence on your lesson goals and how you're going to assess it. So making decisions that include the annotation or double entry journaling of text. So what is the text? What do I want to do with the text? Given what I want to do, what sort of activity should I do with it? And where am I trying to come out on the other side? And this is just an example of a timeline for work that we did. We started in one school with just a pilot team of biology teachers, just 5 of them. And they would work every 2 weeks in the work circle where it says PD with the 5 teachers. That was every 2 months with the work circle, and then they'd work on their own. And then in the spring, we continued with the biology team, and the team now implemented the genetics unit that it was working on in the fall in the work circle. And they were getting coaching support. The following summer, that group then created some model lessons for the rest of the biology teachers. And then in the fall, they kicked off this material, the science learning with all the 14 science teachers. And then the school started with the chemistry group. So it was just, you start with a small group, you work on some pilot lessons, you try it out, then you work on lessons that identify lessons that are important for the year. All 14 teachers do it, and you start with the next group, pilot group of chemistry teachers, and you go on from there. So it's small, planning, bigger, small, planning, bigger. That was the work that we did. So we're going to try the tools on for size today. We're going to do annotation, double entry journaling, and summary. So first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to write a short narrative which describes what reading, writing, and discussion look like in your discipline. And I particularly want you to think about how you learned your discipline, what kind of writing and reading, talking you learned in your discipline. And you can choose elementary, high school, college, whenever you feel like you really learned your discipline. But how did you learn it? What was the role of reading and writing and talking in there? It might have been no role at all, but I doubt it. You had to have sometime picked up a pen and had to take some notes or write in a science workbook or something like that. So what was the role? And then you're going to discuss your narrative with your colleagues. Then we're going to read a nanotechnology article, which has either been printed out or is loaded onto your laptops. And we're going to pay attention to how you read it and discuss that. And then you're going to read a math or science article, and you're going to review the annotations and do annotations with that. Then after lunch, and we're going to take some breaks, and you should feel free if you need a bio break to go take one. And then after lunch, we're going to do double entry journaling and summary writing, and we're going to talk about what those experiences are like, what it's like to do them, and you're going to try a couple of them. So, and then we'll reconvene at the end of the day as a group to talk about what we did and what we learned and what next steps might be. So that's the plan for today. And thank you. I have talked for 46 minutes, and you guys have been very kind and haven't yawned or put your heads on the table or anything. So I appreciate it. So, you know, we'll oh, and by the way, I should change this. I need to change this information here at the bottom, and I'll do that before we leave today. So, because I like this slide, and I went and found it, but I didn't change that stuff, so I will change it. And so, if you get started, what I'd like you to do is to now get a sheet of paper and write what literacy looks like in your discipline, and then we'll talk about it. Okay? These tools or something like that gives them things to hang their ideas on and show what they know. So one of the things that I often see teachers do is they'll do concept maps. Everyone loves concept maps, right? But the piece that's often missing from the concept map, so you're doing a concept map because you're trying to see how they represent what they know. The piece that's missing is, what is the short answer response or summary after the concept map, where they say, this is what I understand about the thing I just drew. This is what I understand about this thing you just illustrated, this image. You know, this is what I understand of it. Because it's in that really tells you the expressive response. They will get this information you're putting in, but getting it doesn't mean the same as being able to hold on to it and use it. And so I often see that happens a lot, and again, teachers get really frustrated. You know, they just drew me this amazing. I have seen kids draw the most beautiful concept maps you've ever seen in life. And then you ask them to say, you know, explain what this concept map means. They can't do it. Why can't they do it? Because they don't really have yet the tools to be able to explain. So something like the STEM, you know, the purpose of this, and giving them these words and phrases, giving them ways of explaining, tools to be able to say, here's what I know, here's why I think I know it, here's what I think it means, stuff like that helps a lot. And so you're doing like 3/4 of the way of what you need to do, and they just need that extra piece to be able to have something to show you what they know. And practice every single day doing that, because that helps a lot. There's a lot more I could say, but that, you know, that I feel your pain, and you are not alone, and all of those things. So I'd love to talk to you more about it. So next.
I did based off my observations since I'm not teaching it.
Uh-huh.
I rarely ever saw any reading. I don't know if I was going to go on the right page. They had a classroom set of books, but I never really saw them use it. I think I walked into one classroom when they were reading, but the teacher was just sitting at the front and letting the students read.
What grade did you see?
High school.
High school.
I think it was 9th grade.
Okay.
And as far as the writing, that was mainly done in their science notebooks, and the discussion, they would take notes from PowerPoint, like somebody else said, and the discussion would consist of like answering questions that the teacher asked,
Mm-hmm.
but it would just be one-word answers. It was really
A discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you all for sharing. As you know, as you can hear, there is writing and there is reading, but the reading and the writing is not necessarily, in most cases, from what you guys have said, getting the students to where they need to be in terms of their ability to talk about the science. I wanted to come back to one thing that I think it was Shannon was saying about videos. And one of the things that I learned and we learned together working with the teachers was that videos are cool. The Alan Alda videos on the new zoos and other sorts of things like that, they're wonderful. But Oops, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I will definitely come to you in a minute. Thank you very much. But one of the challenges is that without a kind of guiding set of questions of what they should be looking for, students look at it like they're, watching The Simpsons. I mean, they aren't extracting information. And then even when they extract the information, they need some task that says a quick write or an exit slip or something that says, so what did you learn from this specifically? Asking, what did you learn about this? What did you learn about this? Asking those kinds of questions gives them a targeted set of things to tell you, and giving them the question ahead of time helps them understand what they're looking for in the movie itself, in the video. It's really, again, about empowering the kids. I mean, they feel often, you talk to these kids and they feel like they're deer in caught in headlights. They don't know what's coming. They know that every single day they're going to sit in there and the majority of them are going to feel scared and stupid. And we don't want them to feel that way. We want them to feel empowered. We want these kids to go on into, whether it's a STEM career and a fancy career, or being a phlebotomist, or being a nurse, or being, something in something that connects to STEM. And they will not get there if they will do everything possible to stay away from science as soon as they can. And they do feel scared, and we can make it better. So I'm sorry. What is your name?
Leo.
Leo? Hi, Leo. I do apologize. I'd love to hear your statement.
My field actually is in science, I'm in math. So
Uh-huh.
most of the writing we do is just not really a lot of writing, just taking notes in class.
Mm-hmm.
But they have to do a lot of reading, like that. A lot of the problems are word problems.
Yes.
And a lot of the times when they're reading through their books, they have to read through equations and formulas
Mm-hmm.
to make sure they understand what all the variables stand for. So yeah, there's actually really important to be literate in math, even though it's mostly numbers. So it's a lot of reading problems and numbers.
There's work I've been doing with the Carnegie Foundation over the last year where they're working on creating new developmental, quantitative reasoning and developmental statistics materials for community colleges. And in that, we've been doing a lot of work with math word problems and trying to think about how to make the word problems more accessible, and trying to give math has a lot of words, as does science, but a lot of these procedure words like explain, describe, consider, imagine, these words. And the challenge with those words is math people and science people know what you're looking for. The kids have no idea. And so they'll write something and they'll say, is this what you mean? Is this what you're looking for? And they will do that all the time. And in part, it's because they don't have the models for what you're looking for. They need a model for it. And that's not to say you haven't been saying it, or even writing it on the board, but they need it pointed out explicitly. Here's the kind of response I might be looking for. Here's an example of it. Giving them something to grasp, so they don't feel so at sea. And so I'm glad you're here. Yes?
Yeah, one of the things that goes on in science classes that I see is the current events.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do so many current events by the semester or term and so forth. And so the kids will write a few sentences off of what they read. They really don't have the tools. Like this Delaware Journal would be so good.
Yeah.
To do one of those instead of just copying the first sentence, the last sentence, and the few things in between.
Yeah.
And that would help them in the reading. It
Yeah.
really would help them in reading and really understanding what the article is about instead of just doing it just like that.
Yeah, exactly. It just becomes busy work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
One of the things I did to help their reading and comprehension in my class, I would make a copy at the end of every chapter in the textbook, that's a summary page,
Mm-hmm.
basically 4 or 5 paragraphs, summarize the whole thing. I would just make a copy of that and give everybody a copy, the students, and then it was a 3-step process that we would go in my class. For example, I would introduce that before I started teaching that unit, and I would make it number 1, of course, they highlight what they think is important, or what they think important things they need to know. That was the first part. The second part, they would outline everything they highlighted, write it out like a outline. So number 1, I'm checking first if they have any idea what's important, the highlighting. Number 2, let's transfer the okay, you write out a sentence for every word you wrote out, see if they understand your definition or whatever you think or whatever. And then I would look at those, I'd pick them up and look at those, and I know whether they comprehend what they're reading, if they know what they should be getting out of the context and so on. And then after they got good at it, after about 2 months, I guess, I would let them exchange their highlights. They would write a little synopsis basically after they fill out the outline. It's a little synopsis of the chapter. I said, okay, exchange and compare, see if they did a good job or not. And they would look at the summary page and compare to what they wrote. And they said, no, look, you didn't mention this. This is probably due to the test and so on. But they were empowered, like you mentioned, they were empowered to, hey, look, I know this. You should know this instead, and so on. But they more or less self-analyzed after 2 semesters, 2 months, like I told you. They realized, and I realized, what they knew, what they needed to improve on, and so on. But that was a little activity I did, like every 2 weeks, or whenever you start a chapter.
It was a routine.
So it was reading, comprehension, plus, do you know what you're looking for? Because you're right, Jackie mentioned, they know everything when they're talking, but they cannot make
They're good talkers.
to write it out or to remember it.
Yeah.
Because they're just like you said, they're watching some TV show. They're not trying to get anything out of it, they're just enjoying it.
And what you gave them was a roadmap, right? It's like, can you imagine trying to get from here to, I don't know, Phoenix, without ever having looked at a Google map or some kind of map to know where you're getting there? If you know where you're supposed to be getting to, it doesn't mean you're going to have it exactly right, but at least you have some sense of where you're going. And that matters. It matters. It makes it less scary. I think you had your hand up. No? Okay. So let's do a bio break, maybe about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I don't know what's normal, but let's do a break, and if people need to stop and stretch or go to the bathroom or whatever. And then we come back, we're going to read about nanotechnology. Somewhere, either printed out or on your notebooks, your laptops, are an article on nanotechnology. Do you guys see it somewhere? Okay. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to read the article on nanotechnology. I want you to read it carefully. I want you to read it the way you would normally read something. You can mark on it if you want. You can not mark on it. It's totally up to you. It's your copy. Okay? Read the article on nanotechnology. We are then going to talk about what it was like to read the article. Okay? And it's about 4 minutes till 11. We will start talking about it maybe in about 10 minutes. Okay? I'm going to exit for a moment to go do my own break.
It was like, did a lot of comparisons between machines and organisms, but I didn't really get much out of it.
Okay.
And I read it first all the way through.
Okay.
And then went back to look for, because I didn't understand any of it,
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of went back, what did I get out of it? Was there anything I could pick up? And I really had a hard time filling out the DEJ, because I actually went and found where it said what the purpose was supposed to be of the web page, but I didn't get any of that from the reading.
Okay.
So it made filling that out, the supporting details, very difficult. So I think the only thing I ended up listing was the different assemblies that they talked about.
Oh, okay. Okay, but you were able to find something in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it didn't really seem like it was really the point of the paper, though.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very good. And what do you know about your reading of complex text? How often do you read something that's like...
Well, right now, since I'm taking a class on psychological learning, it's a lot. I felt like I was reading a foreign language, but I think I picked up more because then we go back and we discuss it afterwards, too, so I'm making those connections.
You're making my argument for me. It's just wonderful. Thank you. Wonderful. Okay, someone else. Yes.
Well, I said after about 5 minutes that I quit. I was going
Did you create a DJ or did you just?
I tried, not much.
Okay.
Just put down what I thought maybe might help me, but still it didn't help me at all.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
You know, it was kind of difficult because I saw the title nanotechnology. I know a little bit about this, but that's not what it was about, really. I mean, they used nanotechnology in essence of what they were doing. So it started off with the objective being to make products less expensive, and they talked about using the positional assembly, and then they described that using the robotic arms. And another main idea was to design various forms of convergent assembly, and then we're using parts along from small to large to use something, to make something bigger using this robotic system that they previously described. And the advantages is it's a convenient way to flexibly build large components from small components. And then they went on to, okay, yeah, you can do this, it sounds good. But wouldn't it be good if we could have a self-replicating system? And they talked about this and described potatoes as how this is a marvelous way of describing the self-replicating systems where we've got the small intricate parts and we come up with that. And it costs very little. And then they talked about this is great, and we're inspired but not copied. Birds are not like planes. And when they talked about how difficult cars are to run and to come around compared to horses, who they do have a self-replicating system. And that's as far as I read. I didn't go any further. But that's essentially what they were talking about. But the difficulty was that's not what I thought it was going to be about. So that kind of was difficult for me to just start doing it.
How did the rest of you feel listening to her just now?
I felt even more out of place.
This was such
She's a smart girl in class.
She's the one copying on both.
Yeah.
I felt basically how Andrea felt as far as like too much detail, give me the facts, and that's how students react to things like this. And when you list, like for example, if you were even trying to get the gist of what Rose was saying, even that confuses you. Wait a minute, you were talking about this, but now you're saying potatoes or horse or which one? And that's how the students take it also.
Yep.
So you try to just give them just the facts, man, just the facts. If you remember that show.
Yeah.
But that's basically what the students want. And so the way I did it basically was almost the same thing. I scanned through it, then I went back and divided, okay, what are the main things they're saying? And basically they were saying, to me, there's two types basically that we're going to try to simple ways. Let's try to get the self-replicating part into what we're building, because that's the better one. They were comparing why this is better than that one and so on. And how can we go about doing that, basically.
So
that's what I got out of this.
no, that's good. So clearly you guys have a pretty good idea of why I wanted you to do this. Everyone in here is college educated. Everyone in here is smarter than the average bear in terms of education, right? Reading this nanotechnology article for you from a Vygotskian perspective in terms of, your zone of proximal development is like what it feels like to a kid who's reading these articles that for us seem, why aren't they getting it? I mean, come on, why aren't they getting it? Well, that's the nanotechnology article for us. And it's important for us to go back into that little self, little Kathy and little Shannon, we need to remember that little person inside and how we felt when we were reading that, because when we had the smart kid in the class who's sort of like, okay, I worked through it, and she worked through it and she applied her strategies and she really dissected it, and everyone else is going, God, is she like magic? How did she know that? What did she do? How did she find it? And you're sitting around and like Andrea said, and you're like, God, am I really that stupid? No, we're not stupid. We're all very smart. But the thing is that having some tools to read the complex stuff, because if we avoid it, we can get them out of our grade level. But they're still going to have to read this stuff. They are going to encounter it. And what we're doing is keep shoving them, shoving the problem off into the next grade, the next grade, the next grade, and they don't learn how to read the stuff that they will have to learn to read in college, in community college, in trade school, as young adults. They're going to have to learn how to read hard stuff. And what we've got to figure out is ways to help them read hard stuff. And so, yeah, one task might have been, I might have said to you, please do a DEJ that's only on vocabulary. Or I might have said to you, please do a DEJ that's about analogies. What analogy was made and what do you understand about that analogy? So the potato and self-replication kind of thing, right? There are a million kinds of ways that you could tackle the same article, and then at the end of it, you could say, so tell me what you understand from it. Now there's your formative assessment. What do you understand? Give me 2 or 3 sentences that help me understand so I know what I need to reteach. It's a pretty straightforward thing that you're going to find articles, whether it's on the web or in the textbook or wherever, that are going to have weird titles, that are going to have weird subtitles, that are going to not be the thing that kids thought they were going to read. And we have to have tools to help them feel confident that they can tackle it. Because otherwise, we just keep pushing the problem away.
So unfortunately, I can see a lot of the teachers will just put this on the board and say, copy this.
Yep.
And so we really have not helped them at all.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, Jackie?
I don't think I've ever been so aware of how I read. I just realized right now, I'm so confused because I just realized that I don't teach to read the way I read. I didn't realize that when I read, like I read the first couple of sentences and I realized that I had no idea what I was just like reciting the words in my head and not really trying to comprehend them. And then I was like, okay, I think I'll start reading it out. What the French does is self-replication. And I was like, okay, I need an example of this somewhere, because otherwise I'm going to keep seeing this word everywhere and I don't understand it. And so I wasn't seeing it, and I was like, okay, self-replication. And as I was going, I made sure that I understood enough of the first sentence before moving on to the next one. And then I would reread the first one, and the first one would make more sense. And so I realized that I layered it. And I went from first sentence, kind of not really getting it, figuring out maybe the second sentence was the clue, read the second sentence, kind of, sort of, some of this makes sense with the first one. I still don't know what self-replicating is, I need an example. I let it go, went to the third sentence, okay, kind of, sort of, nanotechnology, okay, fancy word, don't read it yet. And then the next word, and then there was like the next paragraph was like the objective is, and then ta-da, and I was like, oh, okay, it's really not about nanotechnology, this is just a category of all this junk. And then eventually they got to the potato, and I was like, oh, okay, natural system versus an artificial system. It can be anything. And then I realized that the whole paragraph that I skipped before that was, it was just different types of that self-replicating system. It was whatever one started with a C compared to the other one. Okay, so then we skip that junk, and then we get to the potato, natural versus artificial. And then we get past that junk, we're like, oh, okay, car versus horse. And then they do that, and I'm like, okay, I have an idea. I don't teach kids this way. What do I do? So with the kids, it's more like, okay, kids, read the title, read the subtitle, read the question. Remember, you're looking for these questions, so when you read the passage, think, number 1, number 2, try to answer them. Well, I don't really read like that. If I do that, by the time I get to the second paragraph, I don't even remember what the questions were before the passage. So now I'm like, well, now how do I teach now?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I didn't pay her, I promise.
I don't teach the way I read. I didn't realize that I even read like that until right now. I'm like, oh, I read and reread and add to it a sentence. And then when I got to the second paragraph, I reread the first and the second. I got to the third one, and I was like, oh, cut off this junk, because this has nothing to do with the potato. That was just comparing 2 different systems. They weren't even talking about natural versus artificial. They were talking about 2 types of artificial ones. You move past those, you go to the potato. Okay, a bird versus a plane, a potato
Well, but you know, here's the thing. It's not about teaching reading like English language arts teachers teach reading or grammar teachers. That's not what you are. And I am the first one to tell you I'm not trying to make you be that. I do not want you to be that because that's not what you are. Your job is to create the next generation of people who know something about science and maybe some of them who go into some sort of STEM field. That's your job. So it's not about having to teach reading per se. It's helping them to understand how to read in your discipline. What does it mean to learn how to read and write in science? An English language arts teacher can't do that. She doesn't know how, or he doesn't know how to teach how to write in science, which is why oftentimes when you get literacy coaches who are drawn from English language arts, unless they've been trained to teach in science or in mathematics, they have a difficult time because they're trying to teach the way you teach in literature or grammar or whatever. So the task is to step out on that balcony and look down at your own way of approaching reading and your own way of extracting information from that text and say, how do I do this? Because that's a good starting point. It doesn't mean that every child is going to learn the way you learn, but you have something to work with in terms of a meta perspective on how you tackle difficult text. I had a situation when I was in my doctoral program, and people from the time I was a little girl, they said I was smart, and so I believed it. And so I get to my doctoral program, and I'm supposed to take this class in systemic functional linguistics. This title alone scared me. I go into the class, it's the first day of class, we're reading stuff, and I see the words and, but, to, you know, basic English words that I understand, and I don't understand any words in between. Literally, I'm looking at it and I say, I know this is English, I know it's English, but I don't understand what I'm reading. It was the scariest thing I'd ever felt as a student, because if I'm smart and I'm not getting this, what does this mean about my being smart? You know, does it mean I'm not as smart as I thought I was? Well, no, I just didn't know how to read in the discipline of systemic functional linguistics. I had to learn how to do that. And someone, had to help me. I sort of paired up with friends and so forth to learn how to read in that discipline. When kids get this material, for us, because we know it, we know science stuff, we know math stuff, it looks easy to us. It's not easy to them. It feels like nanotechnology. So thinking about how you read is important. Uh-huh.
I think there's some power in having students do what you just did and sharing some of the strategies. For example, if I had difficulty and you shared, well, I did this, then I might think about doing that next time I encounter difficult text. And then I think there's also power in kids who are feeling frustrated, knowing that I'm not the only one, Andrea and I share this that feeling about that article.
Yeah, it is important to know that you're not the only one.
Right.
And so let's roll up our sleeves and tackle it together. How do we get information from this text? And the key, I kind of keep going back to it, is it's not every text. It's the texts that are critical for them. If they don't get this particular information, they're hosed for the rest of the chapter. It's identifying what the important texts are and making sure that you do the work to know that information. Because every single thing that they're reading in the textbook or the other materials is not critical, but there's some things that they've got to have. And those are the things that you do the roll up your sleeves, let's work hard on this. So, yes. Uh-huh.
No, I'm just thinking it's kind of scary because so many of the districts are switching over and getting the kids iPads and so forth, and they think that's the magic bullet.
Yeah.
But we still need to give them the tools in order for them to handle the reading, the text, and everything.
Yeah, just because it's on the iPad doesn't make it any easier. If I could have read systemic functional linguistics on the iPad, I still would have seen and, but, yes, still wouldn't have known what I was reading. Yeah.
Well, it was funny because as Jackie was telling how she read, I never realized that was what I was doing because I had a comprehension problem when I was younger, but I could never remember what my teacher's strategy was for helping me. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm going back and rereading until it makes sense. And I do it sometimes up to 10 times until I get it. But I was like, it was that simple. It's like, may not do it every sentence, but like, whenever I get to a stopping point, okay, I don't get this part, I literally will go back to the last thing I got and reread it. And so I hadn't realized that was what I was doing.
One of the things Jackie and I were talking about in the break is that when you're going through and reading stuff with students, chunking it so that maybe they can write one sentence or two sentences about what they just read. What do they understand about it? You know, covering it up. What do you understand? Pretend you're talking to your little brother or sister. Pretend you're explaining just that paragraph to someone else. If you can just do that, then you can get to the next one and you can do a little more. But chunking it, because it is incredibly overwhelming to encounter a bunch of text, especially when you're not a strong reader. It's incredibly overwhelming, but you can chunk it. Little bits of it, and not having to use, you know, what they want to do then is you say, well, tell me what you understand, and then they want to look and copy, right? But if you turn it over and just say, pretend you're explaining it to, then, you know, just pretend you're explaining it, and just use maybe a sentence or two. What they end up with is a bunch of sentences that are exactly, in their words, explaining what they know, that then can help them with the next part of your lesson plan. And that's it's chunking, making it accessible, you know, making it something that isn't so overwhelmingly scary. So I think we were supposed to start lunch at 11:30, so I'm going to close for now, and then we'll come back together after lunch. Thank you. We're going to go into doing a double entry journal, several different kinds of double entry journals on the material, okay? They should be, I don't think they're printed out. So that, yeah, that's it. Some of this annotation some of these aren't printed out, are they? They're all on the...
I have more of the forms, but the articles don't.
But the articles don't, that's true. So you can annotate on your own paper, yeah. So to switch it up a little bit, why don't we do this? Why don't we read the article and then create for yourself a symbol like a triangle, and those are your vocabulary words, and your rectangle, the other vocabulary words, and then write down what you think the main idea is and the supporting idea.
Excuse me, does anyone get a lump of coffee? I can make a fresh pot. This was all gone.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last what you said. The triangle example?
So you know how you have on the, since you don't have printed out versions, so here,
Like a little key on
yeah,
it?
to make like a little key, yeah. So just to do a check-in with you, after you've annotated 2 articles, at least gone through one kind of annotation with each of the articles, then what I'd like you to do is to share with your table mates the annotation you've done, and then I'd like you to do another annotation, a different kind of annotation. So if you annotated for vocabulary, now annotate for transition words, or annotate for main ideas, supporting ideas, something like that. So do a second round of annotation, and then share that information with your classmates or table mates. So here's a mathematics version of some sorts of things that you might look for in mathematics as well. And I think it's on that same laptop.
Oh, over there, okay.
Yeah. It's loaded on the little jump drive. Meaning more than 2 and probably less than 6 over the course of a few weeks, they get really good at it. And then after that, more than 2 but less than 6, because you don't want to get so off pace on your own pacing schedule that you really just start feeling frustrated, and then you don't do them anymore because you feel like, oh, there's too much, you know, I'm too far behind. But getting them some practice early on helps a lot. And then they get better at it. And having, if you can, make a poster of it or something on the wall so they can always just look right up and say, oh, okay, I'm supposed to triangle or I'm supposed to rectangle or whatever. That helps a lot.
And like, how long should it take them? If you're chunking it into like a small paragraph or something, how long should it take them? Could I use it for a warm-up, or would this be like, you know, use them at 20 minutes?
If it's September and they just started doing them, probably somewhere along the lines of 15 minutes. Okay. If it's November and they've gotten really good at it, 3, 5, at most. Yeah. I mean, it really, they get fast at it, and it becomes a kind of Linus's security blanket, because they say to themselves, okay, I have something to work with here, and they get really, really good at it. And I mentioned either this morning or yesterday that the students will go into other classes and they will say, can I annotate this, please? You know, because it helps me read this information better. And then the teachers from those other classes are like, what's annotation? You know, or they'll say, I just taught my little sister how to do annotation because it really will help her understand what she's reading. And they really get very comfortable with it. And it's definitely the case that when you go into community college or trade school, you're marking something on the text. And it just gives them, they may not ultimately use it when they're 18 years old or 19 and hopefully in some post-secondary something, college or trade school or something, but they will use some markings on the text, and it will give them a way to do something with the text. They have power over the text now. They can mark on it.
This is like a way of helping them, like strategy instruction or whatever, like kind of helping them, I guess, do the things that maybe we think, or like things that better readers might do naturally, like the students who might not naturally do these things.
Strong readers do things with the text. They'll write a question on the side. Why? Really? They underline stuff, you know, they're making stars next to things, they're drawing lines, they're highlighting. Strong readers do that just as a matter of course. And readers who aren't as strong don't have the same sort of experiences doing that. Yeah.
I like that slide that you had in your presentation this morning with the peer checking.
Questioning, looking at the examples.
Points,
Yeah.
Where you have points. That's really what I'm looking for.
Okay.
That will help the students understand that they're doing it, I should be doing that.
So after they've done practice this and you've given them what to annotate, you're saying eventually they'll do this on their own, choosing their own way of annotation.
I think when they, 3 or 4 years, 5 years later, I advocate consistency in annotation in the classroom. But when they go out into the world, when they become, college freshmen, or they're in a certificate program or something like that, once they graduate from high school, they will still do some form of annotation. We all do some form of annotation. They may not use these same particular, the triangle and whatever anymore, but you've taught them now that they can do something with the text. And that's what matters. You've taught them what good readers do, that they do stuff with the text to remind them, to question the text and so forth. And by and large, before they're taught something like this, you tell them to highlight, they're highlighting everything. You tell them to underline, they're underlining it. And there's no rhyme or reason to it, really. They can't really tell you.
So like if it was something like definition, while you're teaching this to them, I'm afraid I'm not getting this, while you're teaching it to them, okay, go through here and tell me the words that you don't know. And that's for you.
Well, mark the words you don't know. Yeah.
That's right. And then that's for you to look over it and to help them learn those words.
Yeah.
But when they start doing this on their own, they're going to say, oh, I don't know this word, I need to find out what it is.
I know,
they're going to do it on their own.
I know that this is a word I don't know.
Okay.
And teachers will let them, the teacher might take up the annotations to look and see what's going on, but the teacher will give them the annotations back to study by for a test. You're looking here, here are the vocabulary words. Here was a word I didn't know. Here's what the main idea and supporting idea. So they use these as a formative tool to help them with the test. Yeah. And the students, by and large, if they know it's not just busy work, if they know that there's a relationship between what they're reading and the assessment, they'll pay more attention and they'll work on it, especially if they know that they can use this material to study for the test.
So it makes it more meaningful.
Way more meaningful, yeah.
That success portion that helps them meet that, because I know a lot of kids will shut down if they figure they're not going to pass anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that they have stuff in front of them that they can work with, it makes a difference. Guiding them through. Okay, for your exam, you are going to have some vocabulary words on there. For your exam, you're going to be asked to talk about the ways that some fact-based information. You're going to be asked to make some predictions, whatever it is, and they're pulling from these annotations, and in a minute you'll see the double entry journals are even more useful in terms of the formative assessment because it's all outlined there. The logic, the analysis is all outlined in the double entry journal.
Now, how do you know what order to put things in? I know you said it's all based on what your goal is for the lesson, but like in science we do a lot of hands-on experimentation, so how do I know when to put the readings before we do an activity or after?
Great question. So depending on, if you're doing a hands-on activity, and the hands-on activity is connected to some concept that they did in a previous lesson or a previous unit, well, then you can probably be fairly explicit about the connection, and you may not have to have them do any background reading first. But if it's something that if it's content that they're not familiar with, or a procedure that they're supposed to be getting introduced to, a tool, some epistemic tool like a chart or graph or table or something like that, that has a particular kind of epistemology associated with it, a way of knowing it, then you definitely want to have them do that reading ahead of time because it tells them what it is that they're supposed to be doing and thinking about and learning. So it really is about whether or not this hands-on activity has any basis of reality for them, any connection to something they've done before. That makes a huge difference.
And then, or like if we have a gap, so like say I have a connection between 3rd and 4th grade, something that they were supposed to learn, but knowing I have one school that's not teaching science at all right now, in 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade, because they're all focused on math and reading.
Because you can't do reading in science.
Exactly. Yeah, I know.
Oops, sorry.
But because they might have that gap going into 5th grade, and those 5th grade teachers say they do an activity, and all of a sudden they see, oh God, they didn't know anything about this. And I could have them go back and do a reading, or do a reading beforehand.
To give them that foundation.
See if they really know it before they move into what they should know by that tested grade level.
Yes, with the one caveat that having them read it and then having them, even if it's 2 or 3 sentences, explain what you understand about this.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because you've got the receptive knowledge, but getting that expressive knowledge is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So having them do a little background is good, but even if it's not that much there, they still need to read the instructions and the directions.
Yeah.
Many times I'll see teachers say, okay, get busy, and we're like, oh, y'all haven't gone over this,
Yeah.
How do you know that the student will be able to follow the instructions or whatever? Is there anything that's confusing? So, the reading is reading.
Reading is reading.
Yeah.
And recording, hands-on activity again, right? Most hands-on activities will ask the students either to create something or to document something. So in the documentation, in doing documenting, do they have clear instructions? Do they have clear models for what they're supposed to be documenting? Can they then explain, I know I sound like a broken record here, but then can they explain what it was that they did in that documenting or creating? Can they actually say, First we did this, then we did this, and we did it because, and this is what we found, and this is why we think it happened. So having that level of explanation is critical, because that's the thing that says, from the hands-on activity they did to any reading that they did, and documenting, here's the total package of what they now understand. And a lot of times we miss that last step. Not just what you did, but why you did it, why you think it works, that sort of thing. That analytic component, not just the reporting. How many of you are ready for the reporting to the group and then doing a double entry journal? Yeah? Yeah, are you ready? Okay, so whoever wants to go first, what did you annotate and what did you find?
I did the meniscus one. Vocabulary words were just, I listed more under other vocabulary than under vocabulary because the specific science ones that I would put on a word wall is what I was going for when I was reading it. So I was like, would I put this on one of my bananas? Because I have a banana theme. I chose meniscus, and I chose concave meniscus as a word, as a term, as opposed to concave by itself and convex by itself. Because that brings on another definition. The whole concave convex this is specific to the meniscus. And
that's important.
Right.
That's very important.
I just taught diffraction and reflection and refraction. I have to group them together.
And so let me interrupt you for 1 minute. One of the things that you know that science does is it'll create these words and phrases that have their own particular meaning in science that individually might mean something slightly different, but when paired, and the students need to know that difference, that it is a concept in and of itself. That pairing, yeah.
Right, that's exactly right, which is actually why I put concave and convex. I annotated it as an other vocabulary word, so I can explain the difference between meniscus and concave together as a concept versus concave by itself and convex by itself. So I squared meniscus, concave meniscus, and convex meniscus, those three terms, and then I put a triangle on liquid, because in 3rd, 4th, and 5th we discussed the phases of matter. Concave, convex, graduated cylinder, volumetric flask, accounts because of the way it's used there. Even because of the way it's used there. With the line, it's very important that they understand where that line goes. And
as opposed to the word, not even, that phrase, not even, yeah.
And the children are so literal at that age, and they're so quick to,
Yep.
Even in Mercury, and then somebody said abundance, which I didn't catch in that one, but I was like, ooh, abundance, that's something else that they probably have to be reading. So, I don't even know if that one was on there, but I just wrote it down as something to teach them. So, that's it.
Have you guys read the piece by Elizabeth Moget on called Maestro, What is Quality? It's a really interesting piece where her doc students were, this was in Detroit, her doc students were doing a study of a classroom, 7th grade classroom, and the teacher was talking about water quality. And the students said, Maestro, what is quality? And then the teacher asked the students to go out into the community and figure out what quality was, what it meant in that community. It's an interesting article. I don't think she's written other things like that, but that one piece was very interesting too, to think in terms of the words that we associate with sort of everyday language have a particular meaning in science, and the students are trying to figure out how to cross that bridge. And so even in other words like that, the kids have a way. It's not like they don't know the word at all, They just don't understand the word relative to the discipline. And the job of the science teacher, among other things, is to walk them across that bridge to the discipline.
What was the name?
Moje, M-O-J-E. It's called Maestro, What is Water Quality? Or what is quality? Sorry, what is quality? It's an interesting piece.
And I added response and molecules produced and then scale, because they learn scale, and this drives me crazy in science when they're taught that a triple beam balance is a scale, because then they go from the basic primary balances, and they're still called scales, and then when we get up to scaling as far as graduated cylinders go, then they're really confused. And so that was one of the things that I knew they would, but I got most of the other words that she had on there as well, so. But I didn't think of the word even, being confusing. I'm like, duh. Like, is there, sure. Yeah.
Any others?
One of the things that you bring up that are very interesting is to just have them develop a vocabulary of supporting words that are not necessarily science specific. Especially with the whole STAR test and increasing the rigor and all that pressure that they're putting on us and the kids and everybody. That kind of brings up another word wall. It's like words like abundance, and there was a word, I can't remember the word, but it was something like a 3 or 4 syllable word also. And just different things like as they were reading their practice tests, and started circling words like as phrases like as opposed to.
A transition phrase. So some comparisons being made, it goes right back, goes right by them if it's not pointed out for them.
And
So
I was thinking of this, so the whole imagery is just so visual. It's just, the homework would be to make a poster with the slide that you had with the, the key, like the map key of that, with the little legend, and then maybe having like a huge triangle on top of a word wall for just those supporting
great
words.
idea. That's a great idea.
And then maybe putting a big rectangle on top of my bananas, because I already have bananas on there. Putting the rectangle so you can distinguish between these are science specific things will help you out.
Because imagine, for example, let's say you have a reading, right? And you as the teacher are reading this ahead of time because you're trying to see what's going to be problematic for the students. A good way to do this is to have an extra copy and take a black pen, like a Sharpie or something. And so first of all, let's say you go through and you rectangle all of the content vocabulary words. And you're like, okay, I'm good to go, right? But then you say, what other words might they not know? So then you take your Sharpie and black out every single word that you think, like, abundance and even. And so black out every single word that you think they may have trouble with. Now look at it. Now it looks like an FBI, sort of redacted document, right? Where you're looking and you're going, and that's what it feels like for them. They read, this word, okay, it's blacked out. This word, blacked out. And you're trying to make sense, if you're the kid, of this reading, and you've got all these blacked out words, and you're trying to work your way through them. That's what it feels like for them, a bunch of blacked out words on a page that they don't know. And so your job is to identify what those blacked out words might be and help them through it ahead of time. But that's visually what it feels like. They don't know that word, so they skip over, okay, another, okay. And you get, you're getting what, about 20%, 30%, 40% if you're lucky of your understanding, because you don't know the words. You just don't know the words. Yeah.
Would it be helpful to do that with the class where you could, like if you did it like on the Elmo or whatever, with the things blacking it out and showing them, let's say all the words we don't know or whatever. So
Agree, words we agree we don't know,
right.
yeah.
And then so we can see, oh wow, this is what, I see it, and then they would, as a class, maybe see
it's a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Anybody else?
No, but it's very interesting that this, I just read a part of the article, but it talks about how this is so important, especially when you're dealing with project-based learning, and, that's like the new key thing for us to know, but if you don't know these other little things that would impact the success of using this strategy, we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Well, because in project-based learning, I mean, I as a postdoc and as a assistant professor, I was deeply involved with folks at Northwestern who were creating a bunch of project-based learning units, and the units are amazing. They're on plate tectonics and behavioral observation and so forth. They're amazing, but they weren't thinking at that time about the kind of kids that were going to be doing this work, that is non-English background students and students with poor literacy skills. And so that's where I first got interested in saying, well, wait a minute, these are cool materials, but the kids aren't going to be able to do much with them because it's hands-on, but kids can do hands-on all day long, and then you ask them what they learned and ask them to write what they learned, and there's not much there. And you feel very frustrated because you just spent, a day or a week or whatever with these hands-on things, and you thought they should know more. Well, they will know more if their understanding is supported through their ability to be able to engage in receptive and expressive language around it. And that's, so a lot of people think, well, they're learning more because they're engaging in project-based learning, only to the extent that they're able to then communicate what it is they actually got from the material, not just in talk, but also in some written form. So let's move now to double entry journaling. And what I'd like you to do is to think about the kind of double entry journal you want to do. It could be on one side, if you look on the page here on the table, it could be something that was surprising and why it was surprising. It could be a formula and what you think it means. It could be a claim, a claim and then evidence for the claim. It could be a definition and what you think that definition means. It could be any number of things like that. And so what you want to do is to try out a few of these. And the goal here is to think about what does it mean, what do you get that's different from the reading depending on the kind of double entry journal you do, as you're focusing on different things. And try to do at least 2 different double entry journals. Yeah? Okay, so if I can just hear from someone, what kind of double entry journal did you decide to do? And bless you. Why did you decide to do that kind? And what did you learn?
I started out with a main idea one and supporting ideas for the meniscus. Just because we teach them when we get graduated cylinders and measuring volume of liquids, what is it? And they have to know that in order to accurately measure. So I started out with that, and since it kind of was, that first paragraph is broken down really easily. It's what is a meniscus, where is it found, what shape is it, and then what is the difference? Because I was unfamiliar with the mercury in glass, and so that surprised me. And so then I answered those questions along with it, which is perfect because it is very Cornell notes. And I made it myself, and I didn't have to give the kids the questions and then answer them. They could literally, in that reading, figure it out themselves. And if one didn't, if they're checking and peer checking, like, just like you were saying, oh, that person could, tell another one, you might want to add that to theirs, you might need to know that. And then the second one I did was more procedural, and that's the second paragraph was how to read it.
So can you read us a little bit of that?
Yeah, I put how to read, read even with the curve of the liquid, the meniscus, and then I draw a picture so that I have that reference in my head. And then why do I read it? It's because you want the center of the liquid, so it'll take that curve into account. and you get an accurate measurement. So,
Very
and
creative.
that's, again, another thing we don't always teach the kids. So,
That's a great example of a procedural one. Yeah, very good. Someone else?
I did my idea and supporting idea on the longest science article.
Mm-hmm.
And
The St. Matthews Island?
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
And I had annotated it already for main idea and supporting idea, so that made it very easy to go back. And I mean, I could probably just, kind of cut and paste the main ideas into the left column and the supporting ideas into the right. So it flowed nicely in just a different format to view, the important points from the video.
Have it, and that's exactly right. It could just simply be moved over, but the idea then is that you've acted on the text because you've made a decision that this is a main idea and this is a supporting idea, and that gives the students some power because they now have words to apply to that text, and that makes a difference for them.
Is there any place in that article for some sort of kind of like a timeline?
Say more about what you mean.
About the dates in the article. Would that be for me?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for a double entry journal. Yeah, it could be something like, what are the important facts, or this event, and this event, and on this side, what happened during these events?
Yeah.
What do you understand about it? Yeah.
I did that one as well because I had extra time. So I did mine as a claim evidence, and so I put the scientists claim that reindeers could survive on there even though they weren't a native species and they'd never lived there before. And then my evidence was they said that the carrying capacity was expected to be 1,623, but they started with 24 in 1944. And then I put the carrying capacity was related to the abundance of food and water, available shelter, room for births, presence and kind of predators, competition between organisms. And then in 1957, when they did their observation, they were up to 1,350 reindeer. And then the reason for that was due to no predators. And then in 1963, they had an observation, they were up to 6,000. And then you could even add that they had no control, so there was no balancing the system. And then from 1963 to 1966 observations, they decreased back down to 42 due to a lack of control. Food sources were depleted. And then after 1966, they started that slow recovery. And in 1975, when they did their final observation, they were back up to 68. So then the kids are literally going through and saying, this is what the scientists claimed, this is what they saw and the reasons why, and then they can then write an explanation of how that carrying capacity of the island is related to how many and what struggles the reindeer went through.
Yep.
And so that took into account your timeline as well.
That's good.
Yes, actually, yes.
Anybody else?
I just went to the terms because I had already annotated them, and so it just kind of, I did I got a little lazy. On one side I did the science terms, on the other side I did the other words, because I was actually intending to do all the terms in one,
Uh-huh.
and then, it didn't work. But, I kind of tried to, approach this in the most simplistic sense that I could, just thinking of it from the point of view of a kid. Maybe he's having a really hard time putting stuff into words, using their own words, not copying the text. I know that they get it, they know that they get it, and then they get caught up in trying to explain. So I try to find different ways to just kind of put these words, these definitions, and like in the discus, I think it says there's something like the line, the curve at the top of the
I mean, it's sort of, you know, imagine yourself trying to write the nanotechnology article in your own words.
But do all the definitions necessarily have to be in your own words? I
No.
mean, if you're having a whole definition, then you can have them, once they have this for the vocabulary, then have them do like the prayer model, where they're taking the word, it goes in the center, then they do the definition, they draw a picture, and what an example and a non-example is. So then they have something to connect it with, and that's part of what they study. So they not only have the definition, but then they have a use and a picture to go with it.
Can I add to that?
Absolutely.
You know what I'm going to say, right?
Not necessarily.
I'm going to say that in addition, so I think that the Frere model is very good, but after that, I would want them to say, I drew, you know, here is this word or whatever it is, the word is such and such, I drew a picture of this because such and such, and this is what I think it means. So really, again, going one step further to get that expressive language out there. So they're, as best they can, they're saying, this is what I understand about this word.
See, and I do like it, I guess, the closing of every lesson. I've been teaching my teachers to add in what we call a DLIQ.
Mm-hmm.
So what did I do in science today?
Mm-hmm.
What did I learn about whatever that was? What did I find interesting? And then I added your extra I in there. What did I write down? I can't remember where I put it. What did I get from it?
Mm-hmm.
And then the Q is what questions do I still have?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I find that that's been working a little bit better to start them building that reflective piece on what they learned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that gets them analytically considering their own understanding.
Right.
And that's the key to really learning. If they can turn the lens on themselves and say, okay, this is what I understand, this is what I don't understand.
Yeah, I know the teachers that I have that are using it have said that's been the most powerful piece that they've been using, is because they are starting to really see what the kids really know and what they're not getting so that they can reteach a little more effectively. And I like that extra because I added, because it's DLIQ, but I figured DLIIQ, and just because I like what did I really get from it. Because if a kid says nothing, then you haven't taught him anything, but they should hopefully be able to make some bigger connection than that.
Yeah, to their own understanding of the science. You know, I remember once I was in a classroom and a teacher was talking about buoyancy and how, you know, things float, and he was trying to teach the kids the idea. And then he said to one of the students, I think his name was Miguel, he says, you know, wasn't your dad in the Navy? I remember you saying your dad was in the Navy one time. Well, you know those ships, you know, they float, and so he's trying to make some humanistic connection, right? And the kids connected, they really sort of grabbed that. And it was a way for them to be able to say, okay, I kind of am beginning to understand what this means. You know, what did you get from it? What does it connect? How does it connect to anything you know in your personal life or, you know, in your community or whatever? Making that connection is the thing that helps them remember. That's the mnemonic. And getting them, rather than telling them how it connects, getting them to think about how it connects can be very powerful. Because they have a lot of science around them. I was saying yesterday that Sherry Shee and I at Lawrence Hall of Science at Berkeley have been doing work for over a year now where kids have these cameras and they go and take pictures of the science around them, but we're not satisfied just with that. In their notebooks, then we want them to explain why that's science. And that's important. Why is that science? Because in the answering why it's science, what you find is that the connection is to chemistry, to physics, to, you know, all sorts of things that they may not have the word or the category for, but they feel and know that it's science, and it's all around them. So making those connections in that I think, and I think it would be very helpful. Yeah. So the last activity I'd like you to do is I want you to write a summary, and I want you to create your own question and write the summary about what you read in the article. And then I'd like you to create a couple of other questions, like what a short answer response or a quick write might be with the students. So by that I mean, if you first, what would a long, long in the sense of maybe a paragraph summary question look like? And then what would a couple of very short kinds of responses, questions look like? Okay. Head nods, shaking. Jackie's frowning at the computer. Okay, let's say 1 more minute. So are the kids. Yeah. Kids are much better at writing the short answer. It's because it's even more specific. And then you can scaffold them. Sometimes we work with teachers and we create a trajectory. So we'll say, let's say if they're in 6th grade. In 6th grade, all we're asking them to do this year is to learn how to get really good at writing responses to short answer questions. By the time 7th grade, they're getting a mix of maybe short answer and a couple of summaries during.
My question was, and I would do it after I taught all of how to measure liquids, the volume of liquid. How would you measure the volume of water? So then they would literally have to explain everything, including the definition of meniscus. Why does it curve? Why do we need it? So that information is all in there.
Right.
So even the techniques, because you don't want to hold the graduated cylinder up and look at it, which most kids will do. They need to put it flat on the table. They need to get down eye level with it. I literally went through, and that would be something I would expect to see in their explanation. So not just what we read, but how do you literally go about doing it?
So what do you guys notice about that question? Can you read the question again?
Sure. How would you measure the volume of water?
What do you notice about it?
I originally started to go about that route, but when with my kids, because they're smaller, I have to break it down to start with reading between I forgot the name of it, the lines in the graduated cylinder, and in the scale, and they don't understand that between 10 and 20, the 15 is the longer line. Like I have to get into that. I think we're thinking of the different age group, because in mine I would have to explain all these things that your demographic would already understand.
Not necessarily.
No.
But I would have already taught all of this.
Okay.
So this would be my culminating final summary of everything I taught.
Okay.
So I would have already gone through, and on one day, we talk about the scale of the graduated cylinder, because they're going to vary between, they might be in increments of 2, or they might be in increments of 1, and so you need to have the kids looking at those things.
Right.
It's like, well, my number goes from 10 to 20, and there's only 4 lines. Well, what do I do?
Right.
So they need to know those. But those are all things that are embedded in your teaching along that entire week. So you might use, well, what is the scale of this graduated cylinder, and have the kid literally tell you how they got it. That could be one of your short ones.
Okay.
It's like, well, where do I read the water? Could be a short one. And so those are your check for understandings along the way.
So, but basically your question about what is she asking? She's really just asking the students to put their writing in their own words, so that they can
And asking how. Yeah. Explain the way this works. Explain this way of doing things. The how gets at that. It's not a yes, no. It's not a fact-based in the sense of they can't just answer, with a few facts. They really have to talk about a process, and that for, given the question, being able to describe a process is very important, and being able to describe, so describing is like the lowest level of response. Well, fact-based is the absolute lowest level. Describing is the next level. Being able to show relationships between things. That's why I was saying earlier about concept mapping. Can they actually explain the relationships of this stuff? And then after that would be being able to explain the process. So, taking them, again, thinking about what are your goals and what do you want them to be able to do. So a high level would be, I want them to be able to explain the process. I want them to understand the totality of this thing. But it's not to say that you couldn't have them do fact-based or describe or show relationships, explain the process. You could do those things on the way, or you may just decide all you really care about is one of the other kind for this particular piece of learning, and that'd be okay too.
But it's all about, again, the goal, whatever you're looking for.
Anyone else? No?
I just thought it was interesting on the sequence, what would you teach first? How to read a cylinder, or, actually measuring the leg width, or what?
And
that's part of analyzing what it is that you need to.
And actually, I would start with what is volume.
That's
So I actually would have started way before then.
Liquid.
Mhm.
Because if your question is in volume or water, and I'm thinking, if I actually did that right now, because I just got that, I want to know, like, how many of them would say, well, what's volume?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I couldn't ask them that question right now, because I don't know how many of them would, know what volume is, so.
But actually, you could, because then that would evaluate where your kids
Yeah,
are.
but I mean, I guess if I.
Right, if you asked it right now, they couldn't necessarily create a summary from it, yeah.
They would ask me, what is volume?
What's volume?
Or they would say, what's the question? Can you write it for me? Can you give me a PowerPoint with it on there? Like, at this point, that, like, literally, that's what they would say, so.
What grade level?
This is ninth grade biology.
My sixth grade, we're starting chemistry, and so one of the first things in the lesson was just basically defining matter. And the kids pretty much had it down. They said it's got to have mass and it's got to have volume. And what I said, well, what's volume or what's mass? They were able to tell me. Some of them weren't. Volumes, space, then space.
And some of them I know that they won't tell you what it is because they're unsure of, and they don't want to take that step to explain it to you. But they want you to tell them first, and then they're like, okay, that's what I thought, but I didn't want to tell you that because then it would be wrong or something like that.
Well, if they do a quick write where they say what they think it is and then read from the quick writes, that'll help. Or they can do the quick write and then look at the answer that they had, even if they're sort of scared to say it. But making the commitment to putting it on paper is really important, because they will say, well, yeah, that's what I thought it was, but, well, did you really? Is what you thought, is what you had on paper actually what was said just then? And having them actually think about what they wrote and what was said is important, to understand the differences between those things, because they may still not have a real sort of good grasp of it. But if they have it on paper, the thought is fleeting, paper is more permanent.
And paper can be scratched out and put the right one later.
Yes, exactly.
Sometimes I try to, I think it's really hard because I try to tell them, I don't want to know if your answer is right or wrong. Like, if I ask them a concept or a question, we asked them about plants or started plants. I didn't really care if they were really right. I just wanted them to be able to kind of give me a statement, support it, say, this is why I think this kind of a thing. And that was like really, really hard to get them to do. And in full sentences, and like they want me to come over and like they want to have a conversation with me real quick before they'll write
ridiculed by you or by anybody else, then they'll do it and you won't have that problem. But they have to feel that safety first.
I don't know if it's from the other teacher or what. Yeah, so that's a new concept that I think that it's okay to be wrong.
Mhm.
And it's okay for you to explain something to me and it's not the right explanation, but the fact that you are able to do that is part of what you're supposed to be able to do.
It's part of science, right?
Yeah.
I mean, scientists try, 50 different ways until they finally maybe get the right one.
Then they tell you, but no, there's one right answer in science, or else we wouldn't be learning. And I'm like, no, that's not how, scientists wouldn't have a job if there was one right answer. They're always testing.
We'd know it and we're done.
And they're always being proved wrong.
Yeah.
And so it's okay to be not wrong.
What you may wanna tell them is you're not trying to prove something right or wrong because it's already been proven by somebody. You're trying to support it with evidence.
Right, that's what you also, that's what I tried to explain to them too. These are just really like hard concepts for them to like grasp right now, I think. And they're just, it's so much for them now, like the abstract concept of science and then the actual content that the specific things they need to know. It's very hard for them to like.
Well, it just sounds like they've been in a pattern of failure over and over, and that's why they're afraid. And so you're gonna have to really give them a lot of really quick, short successes, and then allow them to fail a little bit, and then get them back up until they're comfortable with that cycle, because they're gonna struggle until you get that rapport with them.
Maria?
You made the warning portion, and some of the things that Dr. Gomez went over, and you have this in your little set of things, are other tools that allow the kids to break it down and talk about it, and using the concept mapping, and that also gives them some security. And that way they're not looking for the horrible, I got the wrong answer sort of thing.
Yeah, all your strategies they teach you. That toolkit's a good thing.
But you found a wonderfully warm teacher for having been with them only 2 weeks. That's good.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's only 2 weeks, yeah.
Wow. That's pretty
So
amazing.
it's always building up.
Trust, yeah.
Everything, this classroom manager procedure, and you're gonna have a funky teacher with 4, he was a little bit together, so we're kind of getting to know each other. So,
Yeah, you've got a ways to go with them,
yeah.
but slow baby steps and they'll get it.
I'm her mentor, thank you for affirming all the things you said.
Well, without my mentor, I would have struggled, and I've had several over my years, and I taught 13 years, and I still had rough patches. I didn't have my first really rough years until I was teaching like 10 and 11 years. So I was very fortunate in the first couple of schools I was in that it was very easy. I didn't really have to have a classroom management strategy, but I had to learn one when I got to a different group of kids, and it wasn't naturally ingrained in them to have those successes and failures. And so knowing that you have that, to build that rapport with them is the best way you're going to get them to do anything.
So we're going to close for now, but first of all, I want to thank you guys. You've been amazing. I mean, you've worked really hard today. You've asked really good questions. You've shared. That's really important to really share with each other. The second thing I want to say is that I am always on Gmail, on Skype, email, and I really mean it when I say, email me, Skype me, call me, whatever. And if you've got questions, if I can be useful, or if you just you've got an idea and you just want to bat it around, then do that as well. And this is my passion, so I'm happy to talk with you anytime about it. Okay? Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.